Okay, formal welcome to everyone tuning in for our third session, our third class in Exploring Divine Resonance. It's an honor to be back with you. I want to welcome everyone who's in the Zoom circle here, as well as those who are participating through the YouTube simulcast or replay, as well as those participating through the podcast and other ways that this is being shared. It's an honor to be back with you again. And if this happens to be your first time, well, you've tuned in for a wonderful theme. Our focus for today, for this week, is on soul embodiment. I'm looking forward to exploring that with some words and maybe even a few pictures, some sketches and drawings here in a little bit. But first, before we do anything else, let's gather in our circle energetically to begin, setting everything else aside, not just energetically, but also emotionally and physically, so that there's nothing else going on for you, or at least as much as is possible. Setting all of that aside and beginning to make your way formally with your focus into the circle, with your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky. As always, if all of that is comfortable for you. And most critically, please, as always, do not operate a motor vehicle or heavy equipment of any sort during this or any time we're together. It's not safe to do so. You never know when you're going to drop out. And also, what a wonderful gift to give yourself, the gift of your own presence for you. As you find that place in the circle that resonates most for you. Deep breath in, hold, and as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before in this day, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since we last gathered. And if this is your first time, all the way back to the first of the year, out to the count of 8. And another deep breath in and hold. As you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since you were born, all the way out to the count of 8. Beautiful. And another deep breath in and hold. As you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since the inception of your soul, all the way out to the count of 8. And as you conclude that release, just allow your breath to take on whatever cadence and depth feel most resonant to you. See the breath. The breath is becoming you, and you are becoming the breath. Be the breath. See the breath of the planet. It serves everyone and everything. With each breath, you are connected to everyone and everything by your breath. See how the breath of the planet expands and becomes the breath of the cosmos. For at the very edge of our atmosphere, that breath touches space and in turn, every other aspect of creation. With each breath, you are connected to everyone and everything throughout the entire cosmos, including that energy that underwrites everything else, the divine, a light perhaps originating at the far side of the cosmos, yet with each breath, it moves closer and closer to you until eventually you can perceive those twin frequencies that together comprise the divine light, the frequency of the divine itself and the frequency of perfect health, intertwined such that there is no separating one from the other. Be it a waveform or a particle, eventually that light connects in, perhaps initially at your nostrils and then instantaneously throughout every level of your being. And with it, an invitation. Come return to your natural state of resonance and alignment. You may even begin to feel those artifacts of dissonance falling away and gathering at the universal drain, even as resonance spreads throughout your entire body. The breath is becoming you, and you are becoming the breath. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine. For whatever remains in separation, I invite you to remove the universal plug. I'll do the same with your permission. Let's begin. Soul embodiment is an interesting topic for exploration for me because it's two words that I put together to try to describe something for which I had no language to describe. And I've used it so much over the last however many years it's been since I first said soul embodiment, but it could well have been 10 or 11 or maybe even 12 or 13 years. I can't remember when I first used those words together. I feel like soul embodiment is one of the things that God does through me when we're in session. And it's an interesting thing to talk about because it only has meaning from the perspective of separation. If we're trying to communicate in wholeness, soul embodiment doesn't have any meaning because our souls are already fully embodied. It's sort of like saying in wholeness, we're already fully integrated. We're fully enlightened. But perhaps, I'll just say this, I can volunteer myself for the example. I'm not having an experience of being fully integrated, except maybe in very small instances in my life. And in the same way, although perhaps to a lesser degree, I'm not having an experience of being fully embodied all the time. But even those words are problematic because they don't just seem to imply, they seem to be saying there's a measurement for embodiment. And once you've met the measurement, once you've achieved this goal, now you're fully embodied. And that also seems problematic to me because it tends to, at least for the way that my separate self is wired, set up an idea that there's something to be accomplished here. And I mean, I guess on the one hand, we could say, sure, there's a practice of embodiment that we could engage in. But I also want to suggest that when it comes to spiritual practice, whether it's meditating or soul embodiment or anything else that you might feel drawn to explore or practice, the goal is the experience, whatever it is. In any case, try not to go down that rabbit hole too far. Just to acknowledge the limitations of language and also from which perspective I'm trying to communicate about this from. A little redundancy there, but that's okay. So, what is soul embodiment? And I want to explore this in a deeper way with words. And of course, from my perspective, the most important exploration we could engage in would be an experiential one with very, very few words. In that sense, I wouldn't be trying to convey anything to you verbally, except perhaps very minor references with words that might come up from time to time. And if you've been in this class since the beginning, you already have had an experience of that. During transmission, that's what's happening. We're going to a deeper experiential exploration. That's why the class is called Exploring Divine Resonance. Well, if we think about soul embodiment, here's one way to understand it. Soul embodiment is necessary for an experience of being present. So, how can we be present with ourselves or with other people? We can do that by embodying our souls. And you might say, well, okay, I want to understand this at a deeper level. Is it possible to be present without having the soul embodied to some significant degree? And I'll just share from my perspective, the answer to that question is no. I know there are some people who will think or engage in a thinking process to try to become present, but those approaches have never made sense to me. They don't really work. If I'm thinking, I'm in my mind, I'm up here in my head. But if my soul's embodied, I'm down here, I'm down in my hips. The primary expression of my energy, of my presence, is in my hips. Now, can you think while you're embodied? Sure, of course. Everything is functioning, but the lead energy when we're embodied is a being energy rather than a feeling energy, which would be related to the heart, or a thinking energy related to the mind. And there's a million things that we could map out here. We could say, these types of feelings are a function, or these types of dynamics are a function of embodiment in the heart, embodiment in the head, and so on. But at least from my perspective, that kind of process doesn't really get us to where I think we can go, or get us to the place where the sort of payoff for embodiment, or the experience of embodiment, is the most important thing. It seems to me if we set up a list of things that are related to certain levels of embodiment, we're going to have this tendency, at least I'll have this tendency, to start trying to evaluate, well, where am I based on this list, versus being present with the experience of soul embodiment. There's one other reference that I think might be helpful to talk about that, for some, I'm guessing, will anchor in some degree of understanding, or at least a recognition of how I think many people, or maybe even most people, can recognize someone who's disembodied. And again, the question of embodiment is not, it's not something to comment on for someone else. Oh, you seem so disembodied today, Ken, or something like that. I mean, maybe in this circle, it might be something like that. But the purpose for exploring embodiment is exclusively for engaging in an interior exploration, just to be clear about that. But if you think about a loved one, a friend who has recently, or at some point in your life, had recently gone through a traumatic experience, could have been a natural disaster, or a disaster of some other sort, or sometimes it can happen with people who have gone through chemotherapy related to cancer treatment and so on. But the way that I recognize it, and I think probably many others do, is that and this doesn't require an intuitive kind of filter or awareness, even though I think we all have that, but that's not what I'm talking about. You can actually see it in their eyes. It's like the light has started to dim a little bit, like they're not entirely home or there anymore. And the the way I would correlate that is to say that they've disembodied up above the eyes. So just as a reference point, that might be meaningful. It's funny, I just want to comment on this for a moment because, of course, for some, this class is unfolding in a visual dynamic, but basically, since I said hi at the beginning, I have had my eyes closed and they're still closed now. And I just want to acknowledge that because in this sort of video focused environment, or at least with video, it can become a visually oriented dynamic. And I find for myself, it can be much more meaningful for me if I close my eyes and just share with my eyes closed. Although I recognize if I'm going to draw something or later, if there are questions, I'll make an attempt to open my eyes, or there are reasons to open eyes. But the point is, if you're on YouTube right now or you're listening to the podcast and you're thinking, well, I'd like to be part of the circle, but I don't want a camera on me to be part of the experience of being in the Zoom circle, I would really encourage you to go to, and you just type this out. Don't worry about www. Just type out exploringdivineresonance.com and add your name and email, and then participate and just leave your camera off or call in to participate in the Zoom circle. If you want to have your camera on, that's fine. It's great, but it's not necessary. And it's not the most important thing from my perspective. The most important thing, or at least one of them, is that we can sit together and explore, perhaps a little bit with words as we're doing now, but also from an experiential place without words, what it is that we're kind of opening up to. And we're doing this, we're engaged in this process in a circle, in a virtual circle, and each of us are having our own individual experience. And it's really important from my perspective that we all are really embracing our own experience that's unfolding, no matter how that may fit with what other people are reflecting about their experience. And that's especially important to talk about today because soul embodiment is such a rich experience. It's not just an experience of being present. That's not just one of the things that happens. There are many, many other things that happen as a result of embodying your soul. And I should say that your embodied soul is its natural state. That's part of how we're built as human beings. The soul wants to come home. And from my perspective, home is in the hips. But it doesn't mean that it descends and then leaves the head or the torso and just is in the hips. It enlivens everything as it descends. So think of it like a Christmas tree or a tree with lights on it, and there are these bands of lights that are lighting up. Boom, a series of lights up in the head, and then the shoulders and the arms and the chest and the abdomen and so on, all the way down into the hips. And then
something happens when the soul comes into the hips, and it's like all the lights now are many, many times brighter. Um, it's difficult to try to articulate how much brighter, but let's just say the brightest light that might be artificial, light bulb or something like that, that is how bright as it descends. But then once the soul is in the hips, all the way embodied down into the hips, then all of a sudden the whole entirety of the being lights up like the sun. It's that impactful. And so one of the things that happens as the soul comes down into the body is that everything is enlivened in the body and in your field. And one way to think about this is that all the things that you are, that is to say, the undistorted expression of the divine that you are as a human being, all those things are enlivened. And then also all the things that you're not. So there are lots of different ways that we could talk about them. But let's just say the things that are held in separation or that are unresolved. And one way to talk about them, though I'm not trying to be dramatic when I use these terms, might be helpful to think of it this way, might not be, totally up to you as to how you approach it. But let's call them the unresolved wounds or traumas that are still held in the body or the field, your field. And so as your soul descends, it enlivens everything. And so this leads to a dynamic that I have referred to as the trauma cycle, because what will happen is the soul will come down into the body. It's enlivening, 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 and then it runs into something that is not, it's untransmuted. It's a wound or a trauma that hasn't been fully addressed yet. And as it encounters that, it re-enlivens the trauma it experiences it in real time. Maybe this is something from when you were much younger, or perhaps if it's not a record scratch for you, from another lifetime. And so it enlivens that, but it is experiencing that trauma, that wound, or whatever it is, that experience of dissonance in real time. From the soul's perspective, it's all now. And so it responds in as a way of sort of functionally encountering dissonance by disembodying and returning to a place of resonance. So if you think about someone's life that you love, or maybe even your own life, you might look at it and think, okay, well, there's a pattern here, but the pattern is invisible. You know, things are good, I'm going along, and then some hidden thing, some invisible tripwire comes up, and I all of a sudden the stuff hits the fan. I'm agitated, I'm frustrated, I'm whatever it is, right? I experience physical discomfort. I'm triggered by something and I don't even know what it is. The soul disembodies, right? And so in that disembodiment, all the sort of artifacts of disembodiment can come up, or I guess we could call them symptoms, though I'm not trying to pretend to be a clinician of any sort, medically, mentally, or otherwise. So I hesitate to try to use that kind of language, but let's just call them artifacts of disembodiment can begin to express. Okay, so I want to try to leave this with sort of bite-sized awareness rather than into the doctoral dissertation level exploration, which I don't think we're anywhere near yet, but I can feel myself being drawn into a deeper exploration with words. And rather than doing that, I want to kind of wrap up this part of our exploration for today with just these few comments, and then we'll transition deeper into transmission without words, and will formally engage in some soul embodiment. So I've talked about embodiment as a pathway to presence. I've talked about soul embodiment as something that enlivens everything within the field of your body, the energetic field of your being, of your expression, and so on. And I've talked about the trauma cycle. And so I just want to comment briefly on how we can break that cycle, how you can break that cycle. I want to say if, but probably more realistic, when, if you engage in any degree of soul embodiment work, if you go deeper with this work, in other words. And perhaps even today, you'll have this experience. It's inevitable that at some point, some experience of dissonance, or let's say nearly inevitable. I guess I can think of some clients who have never had active conscious experiences of dissonance, but a great many have. And that dissonance can show up in many different ways, emotionally and physically. Those are sort of easy ways to talk about. But there are other ways that are much more difficult to name, like energetically. What does it mean to experience energetic dissonance and so on? Here's the key. If we're in a soul embodiment transmission, that means at some level, I'm witnessing you, I'm supporting you in, or God through me is supporting you, is probably a more complete and accurate way of saying that, in your soul being embodied. And so there's an opportunity to transmute the noise, the dissonance that's coming up. And the way that you can participate in that transmutation, the thing that's required of you, if you want to transmute, is to feel whatever's coming up. And the key is to feel as much as you're comfortable feeling. Don't try to go beyond what you think you're capable of or what you're comfortable with. Just engage at whatever level is coming up that you're comfortable engaging at. So, for example, if there's some discomfort physically, you might feel it. And as you begin feeling it, you might think, well, I think I could feel it more. And so you can engage it more. You can allow it to come in. Same thing with emotion. If you find yourself engaging with something that feels like, oh my goodness, it's taken over me. If you can allow yourself to feel it, it's the completion, the expression of that in the context of being supported or witnessed in your embodiment that is transmuting. And just to explain this at a deeper level, from my perspective, the soul, your soul, is the vector, the pathway through which the divine expresses in you. So we could say what's embodying is divine presence, and that's also what is transmuting the noise. It's certainly not me, and it's not really something that you need to try to facilitate for yourself. I would suggest that that could be very challenging, and it's possible, but certainly not in the context of this circle. Let's leave that for a much more advanced circle. But it's not a point of adequacy or inadequacy to do this for yourself. It's a big deal to be able to fully express and experience whatever's coming up. So I really encourage you to focus in that way to the degree that you're comfortable doing so. The last thing I want to leave you with is a word picture. I'm not going to draw it because I just want to share it simply with you. And we can explore this more later in our interactive session if it's of interest to you. Your mind is like the mast and the sail for a sailboat. It's obviously very important, but if the mast and the sail are put out to sea on their own, they don't do anything, do they? I mean, they capsize. There's no way for the mast to stay upright, and they're in the water and they're just doing nothing, right? But if we plant the mast in the hull of the boat, and now we have what appears to be a complete boat, the boat and the mast and the sail, this would be equivalent to being embodied in your heart. Powerful for sure, no doubt. And from the outside, looks like we've got a boat doing what it was built to do. But if we put this boat out to sea and the winds of opportunity or the winds of challenge blow, that boat is going to capsize. And it's not going to be able to function the way it was designed to, because the mast and the sails are not counterbalanced. They have an enormous amount of potential, but when the wind blows, without that counterbalance, the boat capsizes. But if we drop the keel, which is that counterbalance that hangs below a sailboat, now that's akin to being embodied in the hips. It's not outwardly visible, right? A boat that has a keel and a boat that doesn't have a keel look the same above the water. But the boat with its keel dropped, we put it out to sea, and the winds of opportunity or the winds of challenge begin to blow. And there's a counterweight, there's a balance to what the sails and the mast can address. In other words, being is the dominant presence, and feeling and thinking are subordinate to it. If they become primary, that is, they exist or express outside of the context of being embodied, in other words, being disembodied, well, the boat capsizes or the hull disappears, right? And we could take this further, but for now, it feels to me like the next step in our exploration is to set aside even the idea that there is something to understand about soul embodiment. It's a bit of a paradox. Here I have expended many words and a good amount of time talking about it. There's value to that, no doubt, right? We're going to do something, and if this is your first time in the circle or sitting with me, this likely is an entirely new perspective on some aspect of spirituality. And I recognize it can be helpful to understand, what's this guy talking about? What are we going to do? But if we leave it there, the emphasis is on our understanding. And I've just shared with you a word picture of a boat and a keel. And even if you have no idea what a keel is, you have some sense of it because I've described it as a counterweight, the thing that keeps the boat from capsizing when the winds of opportunity or challenge blow. Wouldn't it be interesting to be able to experience that now? But even more than the idea of the experience is the actual experience itself. And for that, we don't need to think at all. And so in the last few moments of this sharing or teaching or reflection period for our class together today, I want to invite you to do a little bit of breathing again and release whatever you think you understand at a deeper level, as well as the thoughts or the feelings that have been both dissonant and resonant. In other words, not just the things you think you understand, but also the things that have been stirred up by what I've shared. Just set it all aside by taking a deep breath in and hold. And as you release this breath now, letting go of the thinking and the feeling and even the being that has dominated since we began our time together in this circle today, and open up to something unknown next. If you're tuning in just for the transmission today, I'm affirming that the plug has been pulled and we have begun. My sense is that I'll be calling out the chakras by number, the traditional chakras. And if you're wondering what are the chakras, don't worry about it. The understanding doesn't matter. The point is a reference. It's not limited to this, and we don't need to go into it. In fact, if you're ready to drop out, let go of my words, because the primary thing that's happening here has absolutely nothing to do with them. 7. Remember, feel, express, experience fully to the degree that you're comfortable doing so, whatever comes up. With your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky, if all of that is comfortable for you. You don't need to push your soul in. You don't need to push against anything. I'll support all of that. And I'm not pushing on anything. Your soul wants to come home. In the wholeness of who you are, it is home and fully integrated. And now to have a deeper experience of that. 7. If it's helpful, you can remind yourself with each breath, you are connected to everyone, everything, the divine, the light, the twin frequencies, connecting into each of the smallest aspects, known and unknown, the invitation to return to your natural state of resonance and alignment. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine. And the river is flowing. 6. Water always flows downhill. Sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's invisible. So too the soul comes home into the hips. Just breathe. The river is flowing.
5, 4, 3, 2, 'Sometimes with embodiment, It can feel like gravity is being turned up. If you're having that experience, you're not doing anything wrong. And if you're not having that experience, you're not doing anything wrong. Just be with whatever is coming up, whatever the feeling or experience might be. It might be empty, void of anything. It might feel deeply resonant or deeply dissonant. Just be with the feeling, whatever it is. You don't have to understand it. If you're willing, if you're ready, you can express it. Feel it as fully as you're willing to, as fully as you're ready to. 1. I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. If you're in a deep exploration and you'd like the transmission to continue, you can simply pause the session here. It's much easier to do if you're on replay than if you're live. But I'm sure you can figure it out if you're live as well. And then just make sure that you press play again before you conclude. And if you are concluding here, I invite you to return the universal plug, knowing the transmission will come to a close. Otherwise, we'll continue on into our third and final segment now. Questions and reflections and integration. Opening into our third and final segment for today. Plug is pulled. We have begun. Transmission is ongoing. If there are questions that are coming up, you can just unmute yourself if you're here in the circle. And it's sort of self-appointed. No need to raise your hand. Just unmute yourself and start asking your question.
Hey, Ken.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, a question for you on what you had mentioned earlier regarding trauma and embodiment and how the soul sort of disembodies. We take it a little further. Does anxiety work much the same way? Because I've also noticed that many people experiencing anxiety also have that faraway look in their eyes too, and seem to be operating on a completely different level. And anxiety and trauma are pretty closely related, especially nowadays.
They sure can be. Yes, from my perspective, Brian, one of the byproducts of disembodiment is anxiety, depression. There are many, many other things like that that are, from my perspective, related to disembodiment.
And does feeling, I know you said to feel in the embodiment process, to feel what comes up, does feeling that anxiety work the same way? Feeling that stuff that comes up sort of help the embodiment? Or most people are afraid to feel it because anxiety can sort of take on a life of its own. You know, your mind starts running in circles, it starts feeding on itself. And I think that's why a lot of people check out with drugs and other.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, there are some nuances to the transmutation process. One of them is that it's really important to feel without becoming identified with, which is like splitting hairs with anxiety. It's like asking somebody to, I want you to dance on this razor blade and don't go over the line. Someone who's really feeling anxious probably can't help themselves but feel anxious. But there's a difference between observing, which is, from my perspective, is a disembodied dynamic or a disassociation, and a process of feeling, which would be an association and an embodiment. So let's use anxiety as an example. So let's say somebody is feeling anxiety and that anxiety is coming up. As you point out, there are maybe 3 different kind of primary vectors for anxiety, right? One might be thoughts. There might be an emotional component to it. And for many people, there's a physical component to it as well. Does that resonate with you, Brian?
Yes.
So no need to inspire someone. Like if I'm working with somebody one-on-one who's dealing with anxiety, it's happening anyway, right? So
Right.
what I'm doing through the embodiment process is just supporting them in embodying. They're already feeling it. And likely what happens is that at some point, the anxiety begins to fade, but it doesn't really make sense to the person who's been experiencing anxiety. Why am I not feeling this anymore? What happened? Right? And
Right.
the key is to, as much as possible, try to avoid getting into that kind of analysis, because we're back into thinking. That could be a disembodied perspective. So if I were working with somebody in this, I might say, for now, let's just be with whatever's coming up. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep. Clears
Beautiful.
up a little better.
Yeah. It's the thing that can be very challenging around anxiety or depression or many other kind of experiences is that there's a loop that develops, as you point out. It's like this feedback loop that is this sort of spiral into more and more intense experiences of dissonance. And one of the components of that can be trying to understand it. What am I doing wrong? What could I do differently? And so on, which for people who have comprehensive experiences of anxiety or depression or other dynamics, is an endless pursuit. It just leads to more and more of that. So
Right.
one of the things, like if somebody was going to go back and listen to this again, who maybe has been experiencing anxiety or depression, is to not follow that path, to try to understand and just feel, not to try to describe or observe, but to feel. In other words, to come to greater intimacy with. That's where the transmutation, the best example I can give of transmutation, just so that we're all on the same page, is a very, very hot fire will transmute, will consume a log, and virtually nothing will remain. Right? So if we think about that as a charge associated with the body, let's say, that charge, it's not that the trauma, let's say it was an actual incision that as part of the trauma cycle is beginning to get red and pain is coming up. As that is being transmuted, those physical experiences and emotional dynamics associated with them begin to fade. And there can be this, well, what's happening? What is that? But if we just stay with the experience, it can be much more complete and open something new. I don't know if I'm speaking clearly, Brian, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's that distinction there between, in the self-help fields and even in spiritual work of, working on those things. We're taught with trauma, we need to heal it, we need to do this. And for many, you believe that what you have to do is dive into it, take it apart, disassemble it, relive the experience and everything else, excavate more or less. And when it can actually just transmute and go on its own, if you sort of allow it to be that way, allow it to be what it is. Because sometimes when we're trying the embodiment and in these exercises and stuff, the mind doesn't want to shut down, it wants to continue to ponder. But I've realized something profound in this, and some I've learned myself, that the so-called monkey mind that they tell us we have is not really a standard human operating thing. It usually only happens when you're in some form of anxiety. If it's just a little bit or a lot, I find that when I'm in that resting, peaceful state, the mind doesn't seem to go all over the place. It seems to be more focused in whatever does come up. But the monkey mind, or the mind wandering all over the place, seems to only be an aspect of trauma or anxiety, or, like I said, even if you're just experiencing a little bit of anxiety, or whether you're experiencing a lot, that seems to be, so it doesn't seem to be the normal operating system that we go by. I find that rather kind of profound in these experiences.
It's a wonderful reflection. I mean, for people that may not be resonating with, or who are thinking, oh my gosh, I've never had that experience, what am I doing wrong? The only thing that I would add to that, if I could, Brian, is what you're saying makes sense. And from my perspective, the key isn't to get to a state to accomplish something with embodiment. It will be. We will all transmute. We will all come to a deeper experience of embodied resonance. But as for what that looks like, if we have attachments to that, either to how quickly or to what that process is going to feel like, or any of that, that just gets in the way. This has to be faster. Oh my gosh, there's my monkey mind. I must be anxious. It's not a thinking process. It's a feeling and experiencing process. And that may take practice. But with that then comes, as you're reflecting, the deeper experience of peace that doesn't have an origin, at least not in the conventional sense. From the perspective of separation, where did this peace come from? It came from X, Y, and Z. I cleared this, I. But if we let go of that, it's the being experience that is underneath everything. And to your point, we don't have to unpack trauma or relive it. We can just be with it however it shows up. And for some people, I mean, I've worked with plenty of people for whom there is no dissonance associated with it. It just transmutes without any noise coming up.
Yeah. That takes the pressure off too, when we don't have to try to get somewhere. So if we're going through trying to embody, if the mind does wander all over the place, instead of trying to rein it in, just let it do what it is, and you'll
exactly
drop out, or it'll be what it needs to be. So that takes the pressure off,
Yeah. That's brilliant. The key is, and I mean, I have been saying this for years, and this isn't to try to say that learning meditation a certain way is a problem. It's just that when I'm facilitating or leading a circle, the reinforcement I want to give, if I'm going to comment on it at all, is it doesn't matter. If your mind is busy, great, let it be busy. Be with whatever's there. Just be with it. And, it's the mind is no more an expression of dissonance than the heart or the hips, right? Once, if we use the sailboat, once the mast is planted in the hull and the keel has dropped, the mast is a wonderful and extraordinary resource. It's just subordinate to the keel. It's in the context of the hips. And if you look at the body, the heart sits atop the hips and the head atop the heart. So there we are, the base of the pyramid. The most important piece is being in the hips, and we'll get there. So,
right.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Glad you're here. Brenda put in the chat, first time here. I love this. However, what is the universal plug? A question many have asked, Brenda. I will refer you to the first class in this series where I answered that question in the Q&A portion. And Brenda, since you're on the Zoom and I can actually see your question, I know you're already registered for the class, and you can actually go into the Resonance Institute and look at just that third segment. You can even look at the transcript, which will give you timestamps for when that was addressed, and then speed up the video if you want to see. I think I actually did some really high quality drawings about the universal plug. And for those that are either listening or viewing on YouTube or in some other way and saying, hey, I want that experience too, you can have it. It's free. exploringdivineresonance.com. Just add your name and email address. You'll get a login to my online learning platform, the Resonance Institute, and then you'll have access to all the recordings. There are audio and video available for each segment.
Usually there are 3. Opening and reflection is 1. Transmission is the 2nd, and the 3rd segment is the one we're in right now, Q&A. Thanks for the question. You're welcome, Brenda. Thanks. I'm glad I actually remember to look at the chat. I don't always do that. What else is coming up?
Ken, I have a question.
Okay. Hi, Susan.
Hi. I'm going to have to relook at this a few times. I'm kind of wrapping my head around it. I'm just kind of wondering, like, can you be dragging around stuff that needs to be transmuting indefinitely?
Sure.
Does well, like, is there a point to it? Does something happen somewhere down the line? I'm coming from my own experience. I have worked with healers and I've worked on myself and so on and so forth. And I don't want to get into, an analysis or anything.
Sure.
But one of the things that has come up is seem to be certain trends or threads or themes that show up again and again, and like somebody may it may come up and someone may help me discharge it, or I may work through it, and then down the road it seems there's another layer. I mean,
yeah.
So and
what's up with that?
and I have to say, after you're saying don't analyze and don't think about it, but finally something has connected. You keep talking about getting into the hips, and I understand. Well, I got that you said get into the hips, but something you said today just kind of connected, and it's like, oh, so what happens when I'm getting going off or getting thrown off? It's like I'm not grounding down into the hips. That's what's causing me to get all into my head or worked up about the emotion or whatever. It's like, oh, I have to go down, like feel myself down in the hips. So now I get it. Thank you.
Hallelujah. So Susan, it seems to me that you inspire my drawing, which I don't know whether you want to feel good about that or maybe you want to feel bad about that, because the quality of the drawing may leave a lot to be desired. But
I don't think about it.
I'll try. There may be others though in the circle who are thinking, "Oh, geez, Susan, you have to stop inspiring his drawing." But I want to try to see if I can't talk about it while I draw a little bit, so that maybe there's another manner in which I'm communicating. And I've only done drawings over the last year, so for those who aren't looking or can't see this, or don't enjoy sight, who are have limited visual ability or can't see, you're not missing out on much. I'm just scratching some drawings, and I'll try to describe them with words as well. So let me just see if I can get a screen share going here real quick. And let's see if this is going to work. Do you see my little sketch pad here?
Yes.
Okay. So if we have our little sketch person, or my little sketch person, and your first question, that I'm, at least the one I'm remembering, is this question of, I'm having this dynamic where I'm in a circle. I keep encountering, I'm just drawing this off to the side. I mean to be representing what's going on in the body, but here it is off to the side so we can see the circle. And here is the trauma. So I can't remember how I've represented the traumas in the past, but let's say this is a trauma that is untransmuted. And by the way, I'm not speaking, I mean, this could be, you know, an energetic thing, but it also, like, if this is at the level of the heart, if somebody's had open heart surgery, they may have the incision, the chest, there may be discomfort. That could be the untransmuted trauma. I can think of, I mean, at least one at the top of my mind. Years and years ago, a friend of mine, she said, I've been dealing with this for months, and there's an incision from when I was a teenager that's been red and painful. And I feel like I'm just bouncing around and nothing is settling. So, I mean, it can be literally the physical body in pain, just to, not to overemphasize that, but just to make that clear. So let's say that all of this stuff is theme A, whatever that is, right? And there's this dynamic going on. Now, over here, we have our friendly, oops, I didn't mean to make like that. We have our friendly healer. And the healer might be focusing intention on this. They might be focusing intention through their ideas and their feeling. And from my standpoint, this is just going to persist. If we try to clear it, it's not something to be cleared. It's not something to be attended to in that way. If we think about it as just play along with me here for a minute. So a body is thrown into a windshield in a car accident. There's our literal example. And now the windshield becomes a metaphor for something that is visible at the level of the body, at the level of the mind, and on other levels as well. And the challenge is this person, healer or therapist or whatever, if the focus is on, well, what's going on here at the level of thought, that's meaningful, but there are other components as well. And by the way, I'm not trying to knock talk therapy or anything. I'm not saying that these things are ineffective or shouldn't be engaged in. I'm simply trying to talk about the manner in which I perceive this from my perspective, if that's fair. So, whereas if this person is, oops, I'm going to back too much out. Or if this person is sitting in a being state, let's get a new color going on. They're not really healing anything. There's no intention happening associated with that. And what is going on over here is an enlivenment of divine resonance and presence. Well, it's in the context of this light, this fire, in this case, this gold, interacting with this and unpacking this. I don't know how I would represent that visually. The this is here for people who aren't seeing this are just radiant gold that radiates up from the hips, trying to represent the being presence of divinity. It's the combination of that along with feeling it that transmutes whatever this stuff is. This here, for those again that can't see this, is the untransmuted trauma, which I happen to be representing at the level of the heart. Now, there are a couple things to be aware of here. One of which is that the degree to which this trauma is transmuted is the degree to which this person, the one who's experiencing it, is actually feeling that, which, I mean, how do you know? How do you measure? Is there I take my temperature, but I say the alphabet backwards, and then I know I've got, I got to C, and so there's just a little bit left. You have no way of knowing, right? But here's another thing. There might be some trauma buried at a deeper level that's still theme A. Now I've just, let's say, drawn a picture around the abdomen. So you transmute this trauma on theme A up here, it's gone. oops, that's not really doing it. But anyway, it's gone. But now in your embodiment process, you go down here to the gut. And I'm going to drop the screen share because I think you sort of get if there was anything to be gotten from my illustration, it's been received. So let's say theme A was here and theme A is lower. Well, it might look like it's the same stuff, but it's just held in the body or in the field in a different level. But there's something else going on too. And I know I'm mixing metaphors, and sorry, I don't know how else to do it. But transmuting, now just wipe out the idea that you're dropping into the body, and now you're out plowing a field. You're tilling the soil. And the first time, tilling the soil is like living your life, is like embodying your soul. The first time you go through, you've got, a 6-inch till on. And so it's ripping the soil down 6 inches down, and you're dragging up, old stumps and untransmuted trauma. And if the fire is hot enough of your embodied presence, then it transmutes. And, you think the plot of your garden of divine presence is, this little plot, this cute little plot in the backyard. And, and then you do it again. And this time, just because now you've embodied it at a deeper level, your till is a foot deep. I don't even know if I'm using the right words, but let's just pretend I am. And so now you run into more stuff. But actually, as you're working this plot of ground, you have the sense like, I feel like my garden's bigger. And if you take this in the context of life, at some point, maybe you think, oh my gosh, I'm feeling called to this thing. God is calling me to step out in the world and begin sharing my gifts. Well, effectively, in this metaphor, the garden plot just got acres and acres big, or maybe hundreds of acres big, if we want to use it that way, or even thousands. So, back at the beginning, whenever that was in your life, you were tilling the soil in a cute little garden plot in your backyard, and now you're plowing this thing that is, the size of I don't know what. And every time you go through it, as you embody and integrate at a deeper and deeper level and come more fully into your purpose and yada yada, all these other components, the plot of ground appears to grow, and you're tilling at a deeper level. Now I'm going to stop because I could get carried away with this, and I think if there's been any instructive insight, I've reached the point where there's a diminishing return to stick with it. But does that make sense in terms of how, even if you had an entirely effective process for actually transmuting fully whatever's coming up, how you could still end up in this experience of, I'm revisiting these themes over and over and over again? Does that sort of resonate for you, Susan?
Well, I'll have to let it percolate, but I think so.
Yeah.
But what you brought up from your analogies is, so how does that work with somebody whose trauma is overwhelming, as opposed to you had a scar or a surgery or whatever? If you've been through a war, if you've been tortured, if you've been, so how do you you don't have to analyze it, you don't have to, but bringing up the feelings are going to be quite overwhelming.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I've never had an experience where I've worked with somebody, either in the context of a group once the group gets going, or individually in one-on-one session work, where feeling it hasn't been overwhelming. It's always overwhelming. And it doesn't matter what the source of the trauma is, whether it's known or unknown, whether it's physical, emotional, or blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. This is the thing that is so, it's both liberating and also very challenging about trauma. I mean, I realize there's a clinical definition of trauma, whatever that is. I'm not a clinician, so I don't even know what it is. It doesn't matter. From the soul's perspective, which is connected to the individual's central nervous system and so on, from my perspective, if we really get down to the deep stuff that's been buried, that we've been ignoring, it's going to be overwhelming. And getting into that is probably the thing that's been avoided for so long in one's life anyway.
But are there not degrees? I mean, yes, it's overwhelming to feel feelings that you've suppressed. I mean, I've been through that myself.
Sure.
But it's not like the feelings I've suppressed are of to it. I'm not suppressing that I was tortured. You know, like torture is not the same as, well, I had a bad experience when I was a kid. I got yelled at. So is there not a difference in degree between?
There is, but listen, some people actually have been tortured to death, and then they've had a near-death experience, and then they're on the other side of that, still in the same body. Other people have been tortured to death in another lifetime, and that trauma is coming through, but it's buried under something else that doesn't look as significant. So the reason why I'm sort of resistant to trying to classify the depth is that the minute we get into a comparative analysis of our trauma or our wounds or whatever it is that we're dealing with, however we want to refer to it in whatever language, there's a tendency to sort of diminish or minimize. Other people have had worse. I've had worse, but that doesn't really, first, that's not instructive or constructive for this process at all, right? And second of all, it's a form of denial. And that denial, I would say, is sort of baked in to our way of processing from the perspective of separation. We have a tendency to deny that as human beings, right? It's one of the ways that we survive. So the trauma cycle, which I've described as something that is unpleasant or not good or whatever, in whatever way you've taken what I've described, is actually a coping mechanism that is brilliant. It's phenomenally helpful until it's not, right? And whatever is coming up for you or for me, if we get into a place where we think, well, this isn't as big as the other thing I was dealing with, or surely someone else has got it worse, now all of a sudden we're not present with our own experience of it. And ultimately, if we're really doing deep work, there's an integration across timelines, and we stop delineating between this is the life I am living to I am actually experiencing all aspects of me. And inevitably, we're going to get into the big, heavy, super qualified 10 on or 11 on a scale of 10 traumas. But if we've gotten into that kind of thinking, we're not feeling, and we're certainly not being. So.
Well, that wasn't exactly where I was going with it. It was, what I was wondering was, could I encounter, for the sake of argument, something where I can't handle it? Like I'm getting into my being, and something's throwing up at me, and it's like, no, I can't deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, I get that I'm taking a roundabout way to the same thing. My point is that that's always the case once we get to the deep stuff. We always think we're in over our head. I've also never, I can say this definitively with one-on-one work, I've never worked with somebody who said, here's a big one coming up, but I've got it. I can handle this. What they're feeling, and normally will give voice to, is this one is going to take me out. And my response to that is, it is divine presence that is the transmuting agent. And this trauma is the thing that's coming up for you to attend to now. And out of this is the other piece of it that, there's so much here, but the trauma isn't just noise. It contains within it an aspect of your whole self. So there's a gift there. And that gift can only be unwrapped by feeling. So, or by experiencing, by expressing. So if it's coming up, from my perspective, it's time. But the individual figures that out. It's not like I'm saying, now is the time you have to do this, right? We all figure that out for ourselves. It's just that inevitably, when we're ready, when someone is ready, that feeling will always be, this is more than I can handle. It just will. There might be, I've got some stuff, I want to deal with that first. I know I can handle it, but underneath that, for everyone, is something that feels like it's too much to handle. And what I tell people is, I've never lost anyone. And, you know, this isn't about me even. I'm not here pulling the strings. This is about divinity. And this isn't our first thing we're doing, right? I mean, if somebody's working with me, either in a circle or one-on-one, we're doing this over time. It's like gently getting into a hot tub that feels too hot to begin, right? And I don't mean we're getting used to things that aren't comfortable or desensitizing or any of that kind of malarkey. I mean, we're approaching something that is much, much deeper, that is virtually impossible to speak of directly. Yet we all have a sense, presumably, that it's there. And to some degree, we're waiting to address that for the right time. And from my perspective, that right time is ongoing, because it's like popcorn going off. It's been going off our whole lives. We're just trying to manage as best we can. I don't know if this resonates. I'm trying to look at the camera so that I'm not looking at you, but then I can't see what you're doing. So I'm trying to be more engaged visually, not closing my eyes, but then I don't know if you're nodding. So does this resonate what I'm saying, Susan?
Like I say, I'm gonna have to percolate it. I'm gonna have to let it, but I I'm I'm getting glimmerings, and it's and it's not all in the thoughts either. It's like something's shifting, something's, and so yeah, I would say, I'll say yes. How's that?
Listen, I mean, all of us are peeling back layers, right? So I don't get it all. I don't think any of us do. My question isn't, has this been resolved? It's more, are we moving forward in some meaningful way that is attempting to address the much deeper piece that's coming up for you, with the recognition that, you know, maybe we'll do that for a long while to come. You know,
Well,
the separate self thinks, I got it. I've got this addressed. It's all done now. But that, I mean, I've never had an experience of that.
I have to admit, sometimes you get carried away or you go off on tangents and it gets difficult to follow where you're going. But that's why I can look at it again and pick out the parts that I needed to hear, and leave the rest.
Fair enough. I'm trying to pay attention to what's showing up intuitively and relates to what you're saying, and what feels ancillary but important to say, in the recognition that we're not just having a one-on-one conversation. We're having a conversation in the context of a circle. And it's difficult to understand where those two come together from my perspective, because, you know, when we're working in a circle, I'm not having an experience of, well, there's Susan and there's so-and-so, there's Brian, and then there, you know, it's not like that for me. It's just an aggregate. So there's an aggregate intuitive dynamic that's going on around the question. So this is a long way of saying, I appreciate what you just said, and hallelujah for that. Sounds like the perfect way to address my digressions. Take what has value and let go of the rest. Brilliant. Anything else coming up around this to ask about? I mean, for you, Susan, sorry.
Oh, for me.
Yeah.
Not at this time, but
okay.
Stay tuned. There's always
Stay tuned. There may be more. Yes, I understand. Brilliant. Good. Any other questions coming up? let me just look at the chat. I don't see anything in the chat either. There are a couple of things I wanted to share with everyone's permission. One of the questions that I think at some point, whether it's coming up for you right now, or maybe it's already come up for you, or maybe it hasn't yet come up, but it's a question that inevitably at some point for many people comes up, which is, if I want to go deeper with this work, how do I do that? And so with your permission, I want to explore that just for a moment. Because if you're in that place, you may have a sense there's something more here and I'm ready for it now. And our circle is on a trajectory that I hope is meaningful for everyone in it, but it can't be meaningful in infinite ways to everyone. But there are lots of other resources that are available. And without going into lots of detail about all those resources, there's sort of an umbrella solution that I got intuitive guidance to implement this past fall and have implemented. And there are a number of people who are currently doing this. And so I just want to talk about it for just a moment. It's called Resonance Institute membership. And just by way of explaining it briefly, the contrast here is that over the years, when I teach a live class, an intro class has been, a $500 investment, and then the next class is $1,000, and the next class is $2,500, and blah, blah, blah. And, and then those are offered as self-studies, which are usually at half the price of the live class. And it can be a substantial investment to have moved through those classes, and many people have made those substantial investments, and I'm certainly grateful for them. This is how I make my living, and it's been wonderful to be able to work with people in that way. On top of that, there are things that I'm doing every month, this month included, that are live workshops and transmissions and sessions and all sorts of different things. So anyway, over the fall, I woke up actually myself out of a dream, because the answer to sort of how to serve people most effectively seemed to be right in front of me in the dream. And it was to, instead of trying to break everything up individually, just offer it all under one sort of low monthly membership, so that people don't have to choose anymore or have financial anxiety or stress. What's coming next? And what if I want to take it? And how am I going to work that out from a budgetary standpoint, and so on? And so with that, I launched Resonance Institute membership, which includes just about everything I've ever done and everything I'm doing. There are some exclusions. It doesn't include private sessions. It doesn't include some very, very advanced work that I've done in the past, but those are not ever available as self-study classes. In any case, it includes everything else. And the membership right now, at least, is, as I'm doing this live with you, is $97 a month. And it's really intended to be a comprehensive set of solutions that whatever resonates with you, you can go do. So gone is the time of, I have to do this first, and then I have to take this class, and then I have to do this, and then that qualifies me for this, and now I'm into it, 5 or 7 or 10 grand. It's just $97 a month, and you can join for a month and download everything if you want, and then stop your membership, or you can continue on with your membership. And the whole point is, this exchange hopefully is accessible for anyone that would feel called to engage in that way. And it's much more than just these past classes. The deep dive retreat is an ongoing series of retreats. We actually have one tomorrow, the 26th one. We must be coming up on our 1-year anniversary in that circle, which is a really, really profound exploration. It's an amazing group. And many other things that are happening on a regular basis that are live. So it's not just $97 a month gets you old stuff and not new stuff. Any new classes I teach, paid classes I teach, likely will be included in membership, unless they're very advanced things for people who are doing advanced kind of spiritual messenger work, in which case I don't think those will be included in membership. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to resonanceinstitutemembership.com. And if anyone has any questions about Resonance Institute membership, I'm happy to answer those. You can unmute yourself and we can have a little chat about it. Happy to do that, or any other questions that are coming up right now. I'm happy to explore whatever's up in the circle before we wrap up for today. And I appreciate the chance to share. For those that might be interested in going deeper, here's a way to do it that I've never before had available, but now is. Thanks. Any questions? Or yeah, thank you, Joseph. Here's another thing. I'll just on the way of kind of geeking out here, and then if you got a question, jump in and just interrupt me, because this is a slightly self-indulgent geek out moment for me. But I really don't enjoy putting on events to pitch programs. It's not, I enjoy teaching. I enjoy doing the thing that I think God is calling me to do. And that's another thing that happens with Resonance Institute membership. So for example, I'm working on my book. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 are redone. At some point, Chapter 3 will be done sometime in the next 10 years. Hopefully that's a joke. But anyway, I'll do another book study. That'll be part of Resonance Institute membership before the book gets launched. And that's just an example. At some point, we'll do another resonance experiment, and I'll teach Igniting Resonance again. That will be included along with the deep dive series, which will continue on along with Resonance Community and so on. The geek out point here is when I feel called to do something, I don't need to think about how am I going to frame this, sell this, etc. I'm just going to launch it to the community, and for everyone who has Resonance Institute membership, they'll have access to it. So anyway, there's my geek out moment. Any other questions before we wrap up for today? Either about Resonance Institute membership or soul embodiment, or just about anything that might be coming up for you before we wrap up. And I'm not saying that to try to rush you along. I'm just saying I want to close the circle if there's nothing else, and if there are things, please bring them forward. So maybe before we close, I'll just say this about soul embodiment. And I recognize that to a hammer, everything's a nail. So keep that in mind, okay? From my perspective, the first thing, the next thing, and the next thing, no matter what's going on, we could have a Q&A with 10,000 or 100,000 people. And I guarantee you, no matter what's going on, and not because I'm stuck in some rote process, someone might say, I've got this challenge in my relationship, and da-da-da-da-da. Let's say they're willing to forego the story. I got a challenge in the relationship and I feel sad. My response is going to be, because this actually resolves this issue, let's look at soul embodiment. Someone else says, I'm really struggling with this thing physically in my body, and they have let go of this story. So they leave it at that. It doesn't feel good. It's really challenging. What's my next step? My response is, the first thing is soul embodiment. If they say, well, wait a second, you said that to the person in the relationship, but I got a different thing going on. In separation, we perceive all of these different things, you know? This person is saying, I got money stuff going on. This person's got physical healing. This person has relationship stuff. This person is looking for greater traction in their mission. This person is a world-renowned messenger, and they're, working on that last 3% of integration. They have all this awareness, but it's just not all connecting in. for all these people, the work is embodiment. The fascinating and extraordinary thing is embodiment is the only practice, but it's not a practice in union, but it's the only experience or thing that we engage in that sustains through all stages of consciousness, through all of them. We're having an embodied experience, even in union consciousness, and perhaps especially in union consciousness. But we're not practicing wholeness in union. We're not surrendering in union. We're not calling our power home in union. And actually, you can't surrender your way into union consciousness. It's a profound and extraordinary opening. And the kinds of sort of byproducts of embodiment have been, I mean, they would blow your mind without even trying to reiterate them right now. Just suffice to say that these examples and many others, people have had profound shifts simply by engaging in embodiment. Okay. It's a powerful dynamic because you are a powerful vessel, container within which this infinite expression of divinity somehow fully expresses within that finite container. And in its embodiment, in its full expression and integration, all of the gifts of that divine expression are ultimately released. They're set free. They're expressed. All of them, including the integration of those aspects that are held in separation, including the miraculous aspects of the expression of divinity as you, including all of those things are there. Let's take a deep breath in and hold. And then as you release, as you let go, I invite you to let go of everything that I have said, that we have explored, that has resonated, that has triggered, that has brought up dissonance with thoughts, with the body, all of it. Because your embodiment is not a function of understanding anything. It is an aspect of who you really are, and you are already fully embodied. I invite you to begin returning the universal plug. I'll do the same as I begin bringing this transmission to a close. What an honor it is to sit with you and go exploring in this Exploring Divine Resonance Circle, and our theme for today, Soul Embodiment. Plug all the way in, transmission to a close now, until we're together again very soon. Bye for now. Peace. Let's see if I can remember how to turn everything off here.